Hi, this is Laurie Mangold, and I am bringing you in this video the assembly instructions for Big Block 4, the second rectangle. So you had two 24-inch blocks. Last month we did a 12 by 24 rectangle, and this month we're going to do another 12 by 24 rectangle. So this month's block is almost just like last month's, with a couple of small changes. So I'm going to hold this up so you can see. I left the block in Katie, so that's where it is. But you can see that it's flying geese with little independent strips in there. Now we've had a bunch of calls about there's no way with these cutting measurements that this is going to measure 24 inches, and I promise you it will. Okay, so the first thing the instructions tell you to do is make the flying geese. And there are 5 flying geese. And just as a review, so that those of you that may not be comfortable with that yet, there's a couple of ways you can do that. And one of them is to put your square down, draw your line, and then we're going to flip this up and press it. Now before we do that flipping, I'm going to open it, and I am going to trim the middle layer down, and only the middle layer, down to 1/4. And I don't have to be 100% accurate because we're going to trim it again, okay? And the reason I do that is so when I press this, I can flip this up, I can force this triangle to make sure it's square with the corner, and then I can take my iron and I'm just going to finger press it, and I can press that, and then I can open it up and I can trim the bottom layer. And that way I know that corner is square and straight. Now you're going to find that these things, even though we have this square underneath, they like to stretch and get out of interesting shapes, right? So this is number one side. Now when you come back with the second side, you're going to put this one down. We're going to line this up. And then you're going to sew on this line. And notice that, and I know we had some questions about that too, that this overlaps, okay? So you can see this is where the point of this one hits. So this is essentially making a cross, and that cross should be 1/4 inch in because this is your seam allowance. So you are going to sew that, and so if I show you one that's all sewn up, you will see when you press that one up that from the point of the flying goose to the edge of the fabric should be 1/4 inch. And you may want to take your ruler and measure and make sure this is still 3.5 by 6.5 because they tend to want to get a little stretched out. Just don't resist the urge if one side of this is a little higher than the other to whack that off, because there's a good chance the higher one may be the 3.5 inch line. So just be careful when you're checking these and trimming them up. Okay, so that is one way to do the flying geese. The other way that we've shown quite a bit is with the folded corner ruler. And so with the folded corner ruler, if this square were whole on here, I got a little anxious and I sewed them all already. But with the just so you know, if you take this and you put this down here, this would be the whole square. You would pre-trim this and clip it off, okay? And so once it's clipped off, then we're going to come back and sew our seam. And when I flip this up to press it, I always put it on top of a 3.5 inch strip so that I know if I put it in the corner, when I flip this up, I can again force that to be square before I press it. Okay, and we've talked about that a couple of times, and there's a skill video on that, but I just wanted to show that both ways one more time. Now when you get those done, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make the little connector blocks. And this has its little challenges too, because these all measure 1 inch by 6.5 inches. And when you're sewing something this tiny or thin and you put this down there, if you notice this one that's done, you have very little room for pressing and seam allowance. And when you're working on something, let me get one that's a darker color, If you don't sew straight, if you're the least little bit wobbly, you're going to see it big time on a skinnier strip than you will on a fat strip. And so this does require you to sew pretty straight. I like to use a presser foot with a guide. And I'll show you the 57. I'm on a smaller machine. So this guide right here, when I sew, I just keep my fabric against that guide so that I don't have the tendency to fishtail as I'm sewing. I also move my needle over one position to compensate for the fold when we press. Okay, so again, when you go to sew this. Now, the other thing that was happening to me, I cut these at exactly 6.5 inches, and hindsight being 20/20, I probably would have cut these a 1/4 inch longer so that when I got them sewn, if there was any creep on the pieces, I could cleanly cut the 6.5 and have them equal. But I had already cut them. And so a couple things I did, if you're getting creep, when creep means as you're sewing, you're getting, it seems the top one seems to be growing a little bit. Couple things I did to compensate for the creep that I was getting a little bit of creep and it was frustrating me. I lowered the pressure on my presser foot so that it wasn't so heavy and pushing so hard. But the other thing I did was I flipped this over because the pieced piece is already stable here, and I sewed from this side. Your feed dogs will then ease in any differences. I did put a pin towards the bottom, and I eliminated the creep, as you can see on this one, completely. It's nice and straight. So just another hint there, if one of them's getting longer than the other. If you cut them a little bit longer, it doesn't matter if it creeps, because you can clean them up. But if you cut them exactly the right size, then and they creep, then you're going to have to play with it a little bit. Okay? Once those are all sewn, we're going to assemble the block, and that one's not done. I'm going to go for this one. So we're going to put this one, and you're going to put this, the matching piece, and that matches the color. Let me see if I can do one that you can see. So what you want to do is go in, and the first thing you really want to do is you are going to sew the matching color strip to the flying goose block, okay? And again, when you do that and you flip this over, once again, you're going to be sewing a 1/4 inch, which is really tight in here, all right? And I have the arrows on there as to which way to press, so that it will all come out nice and flat. But we're going to sew that one to there, and that one's not too hard because there's no points to deal with. Once you get these sets done, then you're going to come along and you're going to sew the sets together. And so the next thing, or you can just work your way down as a row. I did them in sets. So the next thing, if I were going to sew another one on here, let me find one that's done that you can see the color. Let's go with here. The next one is going to be this set, and if I put this in like this. Now, when you go to sew this to this side, this is where you want to be really careful, and I like to sew from this side when I sew this, because, let me get that little thing out of here. As we've said before, your point is right here where your thread, I can draw that a little bit, your thread crisscrosses and makes an X. I hope you can see that, okay? When you're sewing your 1/4 inch, you want your 1/4 inch seam to be right at that X or one stitch above that X, so that when you flip this over and it's sewn, and I should have sewn one, you will see that you can still see your point. If you end up looking like this and your point is gone, you've gone below the X. And if you end up looking like this and you've got white between you and the point, there's quite a bit of white there, then you've sewn too far above it. Your goal would be to get right there so that that point is clean. Now you have to press towards this piece, because if you press your seam away in this way, you're seeing folds under and pulls that point under, and you won't get a good clean point. So whenever you're sewing flying geese, the seams always have to go away from the point. Okay? So this has kind of been a little discombobulated, but if you think about it, you're just going to be sewing all of these along. And I don't care what color order you sew them in. That's where your little creative juices can come in. And then we've got, I think I've got one more set sewn like this, and then you've got two more. We've got this one that's not sewn yet, and oh, there was one I hadn't sewn yet. And you're just going to make this strip, and believe it or not, that strip will measure 24.5 inches. Okay, and then when you are all done, and actually what happens is we start with this color. You have two of the same color, and that one's going to finish at this end, so to finish your strip. That's your center strip. After you get this work done, you're going to come back and sew your 24-inch pieces, top and bottom, and you will have this block done. I know this looks a mess, but I promise you it will come together. And you'll have another one done. Next month, we're learning a new skill, and in both the regular block and this block, we'll use that new skill and to make another one. So until then, which is not too far away from now, we'll see you next month.